Now the reason I'm bringing all this up was because yesterday there was a massacre in a synagogue. And this spirit of Esau is what you're going to find is the problem. And we need to understand, when you hear somebody, even a Christian person will say, I don't like the Jews. I don't like Israel. They have the spirit of Antichrist in them. Because what we're going to find is even in Revelation, Jesus is going to come back to save Israel. Because they're going to be surrounded. Everybody says, well, Israel is actually the church. No, it's a landmass over there with Israelites in it, and Jesus is going to come back to save them. So, forget about Israel being divorced from God, and we're now the chosen people. They have always been chosen. All of the oracles of God was given to the Jews, and they have been the apple of his eye forever, and it's always going to remain that way. He doesn't backtrack out of a covenant. All of the covenants were made with Israel. So our job is to become part of Israel. And the only way we can do that is through the blood of Jesus being adopted into the family. A lot of Christians think, well, I'm adopted into the family, but they forget about the family. And we need to understand that we're brothers and sisters of these people, no matter how bad they are. Because we're going to see that some of these people are pretty weird. They do some bad stuff. But God's eye is always on Israel. And he is always going to take care of them. And he says, in the end, all Israel will be saved. We have to know how to be Israel. That's the ticket. For a Gentile, the only way to do that is through Jesus. Okay? Last week, we looked at the adoption and cross-handed blessing of Joseph's sons to see the plan God has for his Gentile children being grafted into the family of God. This event will prove to be the most important for Christians to learn, but the blessing of the remaining children of Jacob is a Jewish history lesson to follow the rest of the Bible, even to the last days. So the rest of the children is a history lesson, basically. For a Christian, we needed to know about the adoption. Okay? The rest of it is basically, when you go through Chronicles and Samuel and Kings and all this, you're going to see these names and all this shuffling around of the history of Israel and how it got to be where it is. These pronouncements made by Jacob are really prophecies about what will happen to these tribes in the future, more than just them getting their inheritance from Jacob. Some of the pronouncements sound more like a riddle than a blessing, but we can see how they followed them for thousands of years into the future. Keep in mind that Joseph got the double portion blessing, but Judah is going to get the firstborn blessing. Now, as we talked about before, the normal way to do things was the oldest guy got everything. He got the double portion, and he was the priest of the family, and he was the leader of the family. If another brother wanted to do something, he had to go to the older brother to get permission to do it. Well, this is going to be so split up that even Jews have trouble with it, because they don't really understand. Then when they finally got natural to where they understood, now they don't understand Jesus being a king and a priest. They don't understand that because the priesthood would belong to Aaron, the tribe of Levi, and the kings belong to Judah. So they're confused. How can one man from Judah be priest and king? He says that we have been made priests and kings also. So when we are saved, we are right there with Jesus. The same level. How can we be the priest and a king? Because the tribe system has gone away. We're joining a family. Our Father is Father in heaven. Our brother is Jesus Christ. So this stuff was put here for worldly, carnal reasons, but now it's been superseded for supernatural reasons in heaven. Everything down here is a copy of what's in heaven. So when God gave the dimensions of the temple to Moses, he's given the dimensions of the temple in heaven. There is an altar in heaven. There is an Ark of the Covenant in heaven. But there's also one down here. So this was a copy. That's what it means when it says God gave the Jews the oracles of God. He gave them God's word and he told them how to live. They even dress like him. The holidays are for him. Everything that he wants in heaven is the same as he got down here on the earth. If he had chosen Chinese people, they would look like the Jews today, because they would have had the temple, they would have had the holidays, they would have had the laws, they would have had everything. But he chose randomly, at God's own random, however that is, but he elected these people to do these things. So this is what we have to understand, the election of us. We have been elected. The Holy Spirit chose you to come after you, call your name, woo you to Jesus. Now, a lot of people say he woos everybody. Well, I guess he does. Everybody knows about him, and everybody should be called by the Holy Spirit. But we know that not everyone's going to come. For whatever reason, he is resistible to some people and irresistible to other people.
Right.
And I believe it has to do with this tribal thing that we're talking about here. That if you have been called of God, your genetic makeup hasn't been spoiled by demons. And that was back in Genesis 6. In Genesis 6, it says the sons of God came into the daughters of men and had children, and these children were monsters. They were Nephilim, giants. And most people say, well, I know about David and Goliath. Well, there's tribes of these giants, and they filled the land of Canaan, and they were evil. Evil was on their mind all the time. That's why Noah and the ark came to wipe the whole earth clean, because the demons had spoiled the image of God. Our image is in our DNA. So if me and her have a baby, the image of us is in the baby, but it's also the image of God. Okay? But if a demon has a baby, it's not what God intended. You remember when he would say, and I did this and I saw and it was good. He saw and it was bad for this. This was not natural, what was going on. We're going to find all through the Bible that there's going to be these giants and their influence and the evil that they bring. When the 10 spies came out with a bad report, they had 2 good reports and 10 bad reports. They said that they devoured the people. They were cannibals. They said, we were grasshoppers in their eyes because they were giants. Then it says, these inhabitants, they devoured the inhabitants of the land. So, we're talking evil. And people say that I'm wrong. I'm kind of a little small group of people. Some people will talk about Nephilim, but most people won't. A lot of people will say the sons of God talked about will be the sons of Seth. There's nothing in the Bible to support that. That's wishful thinking. But we know that there were monsters. We know that there were giants in the land.
They changed what God had intended for good. They started changing, just as we are starting to mess with DNA now, make designer babies, alter soldiers so they can be.
They're even making meat in a laboratory now that we'll eat,
We're
because they don't want to have cows killed.
We're dabbling in all that right now, but they already did this.
Right. So there's a lot of people, we could argue about it and everything, but that's fine. But there's nothing in the Bible. You go to seminary and they'll teach you that the sons of God they're talking about with the sons of Seth. Well, how do you have a good man and a woman get babies and have them monsters? There's no doubt that these were bad people. And see, that's Genesis 6. Genesis 7, we're introduced to Noah, and he says, I'm going to kill everybody in the world. So he wanted to wipe it clean. And then later we're going to find that Saul and Joshua were told to go in and kill every living thing, everything that had breath. He wanted it dead. So he didn't do that everywhere. There were some places that it was and some places it wasn't. But he wanted the horses killed, he wanted the donkeys killed, he wanted the women killed, the children killed, dogs and cats. Everything had to die because they practiced witchcraft and did things they weren't supposed to do. And that's like in Deuteronomy and that area. He gave them the order, when you go into this town, you kill everybody. And see, Saul didn't do it, and that's why he died. He said he brought back hostages, Why kill a good horse? You know, why would you kill all the women? I can sell them. Or I can do this. I can ask a bounty for the king. And God's like, I told you to kill everything. It cost Saul his kingship and later his life. That's why David got to be king. This is so unusual that it is unheard of. Ephraim and Manasseh would get most land, but Judah would get the rank of leader in the family. As it turns out, Levi would get the rank of priest of the family. Normally, the oldest would get the double portion of wealth and be the prince and priest of the whole clan. What baffles the Jews of today is that Jesus is a king and a high priest. Actually, before Jacob did this blessing, the father was the king and priest of his clan, just like Noah and the patriarchs were kings and priests of their family. So this was a change. This is where it changed up when Jacob gave out this split blessing. That's the first time it had been done. Then they kept doing that later as the tribal system came. Judah was going to have the leaders, and Levites were going to be the priests, and I don't know, the rest of them did everything else, you know. But as you can see here, this is a map of the breakup here. Here's Manasseh and Manasseh on both sides of the river. The Jordan River goes right down the center here, down to the Dead Sea. All right, Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben are over here, and they were the first attacked all the time. The enemy's going to come in from this direction all the time. Assyria is over there.
Yeah.
They're coming this direction. So Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben are going to be the first attacked. All these tribes over here had good farmland, everything was good over here. Okay, now, this is Simeon's land here. He's completely encircled in Judah. So anywhere he goes, he has to go through Judah's land.
Yeah.
The first census, he had 42 or 43,000 people. The second census was 23,000. He fell almost in half. Here's Reuben's land. He was almost cut in half. Reuben never had any kings, never any generals, wasn't a judge, was nothing. Because he lost his firstborn status. Okay, here's Ephraim. And see, Manasseh is here and here. He got the double portion here, and then you got Ephraim is here. This is Benjamin, little piece right here. But see, he's got Jerusalem. That's the biggie. Okay? And then here's Dan, and he's the first idol worshiper that came through. And of course, up here at the top, you got Naphtali, Asher, Zebulon, Issachar, up here. Genesis 49:1. And Jacob called his sons and said, Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. That literally means the end of days. And they probably were sitting around saying, well, Dad's going to die, and I'm going to see how much money I'm going to get. I'm going to see how much land I'm going to get, how many horses and cows and sheep I'm going to get. And he says, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Notice he said Jacob first, and then Israel. He says, gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob. So they're sons of Jacob, but listen to what Israel says. So this is telling you, when he calls himself Israel, God is directing him what to say. He loves Joseph and he loves Benjamin, but Benjamin's not going to get that much. He's going to get a bad report. So we find out right here in this verse that God is directing him on what he is to say. Okay? The first two verses almost sounds like a carnival barker asking people to step right up and get your fortune read. He states in the first verse that he will tell you your lot in the last days. He takes on the name of Israel to let you know that this is supernaturally discerned. We need to remember that these prophecies are for the future, not for these particular individuals at this time. By the time these guys get any land, it's already been 400 or 500 years. They've been in Egypt as slaves, and no one's taken the land. The land was promised to Abraham. He didn't get it. Promised to Isaac. He didn't get it. It was promised to Jacob, and he's still in Egypt. Yeah, he didn't get it either. These guys are all going to die, either in Egypt or wherever they're going to go, but they're going to be in Egypt, and they're going to be dead before these tribal names are ever used. So when you stop and think about it, every time you see Reuben or Jacob or Ephraim or whatever, that's the tribe of. It's not these people. So these people are going to be the heads of the tribes, but it's not going to be these people. It's going to be their tribe, descendants, okay? They won't even get any land to divide until Moses goes to the promised land some 450 to 500 years from now. What we can see today, however, is how accurate these prophecies ended up being. Knowing this, we could count on the prophecies being accurate in Revelation 7. I should ask that question. Knowing this, can we count on the prophecies being accurate in Revelation 7? When we get to Revelation 7, there's going to be 144,000 from this group, 144,000 from this group, 144,000 this group. You're going to see all the way through, and the order that these people are put in has a lot to do with their importance, and you're going to see Dan completely left out. Ephraim is going to be completely left out, and you're going to see others substituted in. So whenever you read about this genealogy in the Bible, no matter where it's at, pay attention to the order it's in, pay attention to who's in it and who's out of it, because that's going to tell you something what God is doing at that time. These prophecies weren't about these individuals, what these individuals would do, but what these tribes' descendants would become in the future. Some of these prophecies have come true, and some are still for the future. Just as there are many people in the U.S. with various characteristics, is there characteristics of the American people as a whole. It will prove the same for these tribes. If I said the American people do this, not all of them do that. Some of them would do the opposite. But I think there's some stereotypical things that we could say about Americans, that they're patriotic and they're basically honest. There's things that people think about an American that I'm sure is not true with everybody. But this is what he is saying about these people that is going to be a trait with them for the rest of their lives. Okay? Keep in mind that as some people today are happy at the reading of a will, just as many will be disappointed. There will be friction started this day. You can imagine none would be happy knowing Manasseh and Ephraim gets anything, and it will seem Joseph gets a huge blessing over them. We understand today, but they couldn't back then. So at the reading of the will here, there's going to be people mad, because Jacob is going to have some bad things to say about some of his own children, and some of them are going to be blessed beyond measure. Okay, verse 3. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Sounds pretty good so far. I'm sure he's puffing out his chest and getting ready to get his big blessing. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. He hasn't forgotten anything. He's 147. This was probably back when he was 50 or something. I don't even know his age back then, but he has not forgotten this. Okay? And I'm sure that all the boys got to talking around and say, I wonder if Reuben's in trouble or what. But we've seen already that Joseph was his favorite, and Judah was going to take their place because Simeon and Levi messed up in Shechem. Jacob did start off with the oldest son, Reuben. So he at least started in order. He's going in birth order now. So he started with Reuben. Verse 3 starts off sounding pretty good. You have to guess that the boys have been talking about this day for a long time and were wondering how Reuben was going to make out with Dad. Jacob has not forgotten what he did decades ago, taking Bilhah to bed. This wasn't about sex. It was more like a coup to take over the leadership of the family and stop Bilhah from taking the place of Reuben's mother, Leah. Jacob thought this was unstable thinking, and Reuben will pay for it. So he is thinking that just because of the way he thought, he is not qualified to lead the tribe of Israel. He can't do it. Well, he's not going to give him the power to do it. Then he prophesied that he would not excel. I should have underlined it up there. He will not excel. It sort of works on the principle that if you pray for wealth all the time, you may end up poor for your trouble. Reuben certainly lost big time for his defective logic. He thought if he could just outsmart Daddy, he would come in there, make Bilhah dirty, and make Leah, his mother, the top dog. See? He showed it again when he promised Jacob could kill 2 of his sons if he didn't bring Benjamin back from Egypt. Jacob was not impressed. We will see later that Reuben's tribe did get smaller in number compared to some of the others. We can see another aspect of what it meant for Reuben to lose firstborn status in 1 Chronicles 5, 1 and 2. 1 Chronicles 5, 1. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was indeed the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to birthright. So, the way they look at it, Joseph should have been first, if he's going to get the double portion, see? But now it even gets weirder. Yet Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph's. So he just got through saying that Joseph got the birthright, but the ruler is going to come from Jacob, or Judah rather, excuse me. Here we see Joseph got the double portion, but even that went to Joseph's sons. Then it says that Judah prevailed over the rest because a ruler came from Judah, even though that should have come from Joseph. The king that came was David, and then Jesus would come through this same line. As far as the Jews were concerned, they understood the cross-hand blessing was to disinherit Reuben. So they didn't understand why this cross-hand blessing and all this confusion was going on, but they knew that it had something to do with Reuben losing his firstborn status. They didn't get the spiritual meaning of what happened. Reuben had lost all blessing from being firstborn, but just came in as an also ran. Reuben didn't produce one military leader, no kings, no prophets, or a judge. He even failed to cross the Jordan to enter the promised land. He decided that what land he was in was good enough, since the spies told a scary story about what was on the other side of the river. Now remember, this is not Reuben himself, this is his tribe decided to just sit there on this side of the river. You see where he's at over here. Now here's the Moabites right here. I mean, this is the Amorites here. He's got giants here, and he's got giants here, and here he is, but he doesn't want to cross the river to go over here. This is the promised land. So he stayed here with Gad and Manasseh. Yeah. They weren't very strategic, I guess you would say. But I guess he felt like that if they leave me alone, I'll leave them alone or whatever. You know, it didn't work out that way. His land was located on the east side of the Jordan, which made him first in line to be attacked. Before it's over, Manasseh and Gad will join him on the east side of the Jordan. Of course, Manasseh would also take land on the west side of the river also. Reuben's people got so diminished that Moses prayed to God that Reuben's people would live and not die, nor let their people be so few. And that's in Deuteronomy 33:6. If you went to Deuteronomy 33:6, that's exactly what Moses said. He prayed that Reuben wouldn't go out of business because his people were going down so quickly. The lesson here would be that when we sin, we can be forgiven, but what you do here on earth can have lifelong consequences to you, your children, all of your descendants after them. If you rob a bank, you can ask God to forgive, and He will. But you may spend the next 30 years in prison, and your children may inherit the shame you brought on yourself in this life. The money you should have passed on to your son won't come, and he won't be able to give it to his son. Our sinful ways may be passed on to our children. I hope everybody gets the meaning. We're supposed to get life meanings out of these things. And so what Reuben did way back carried on until the end of the tribe. 49:5. Now he's going on to Simeon. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-willed hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Now we have to look carefully at this. He doesn't say anything good. There's not one single thing good about what he says here. He is saying that they're so bad, I don't want to ask their counsel about anything. I don't want their honor tied to me. He's ashamed of them. For in their anger they slew a man. They slew lots of men. They slew a whole town. Okay? And in their self-will, they hamstrung an ox. Meaning, they're so cruel that they just cut the hamstring on an ox so that it couldn't work anymore. So all the animals they left were all hamstrung and crippled and couldn't do any work. They just did it for meanness. Cursed be their anger, and he's cursing them now, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Now, he's talking about two tribes, and one might think that I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel belongs to both of them. But that's not the way a Jew would read it. A Jew would read it, I will divide them in Jacob. That's one of them. And the other one, I will scatter them in Israel. Okay? Now, Simeon and Levi were next in line and had nothing good said about them. Jacob retold the story of how they murdered all the males in Shechem. Jacob said they were cruel, and Jacob didn't want anything to do with them. Anger like theirs was dangerous, and Jacob said that he would divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Sure enough, when Simeon received his land, he is surrounded by Judah's land, and Levi was just given a small plot of land around, that should have been 48 cities, I think, instead of 49. In the future, Simeon was absorbed by Judah, and many of them were scattered throughout the other tribes. They became irrelevant. Now, Levi was divided. Simeon was scattered. Levi wasn't given any land, but he had 48 cities, and what they would do is they had a wall around every city. They would measure out 1,500 feet from the wall, and then that would be Levites' land, the priest's class land. That would go 1,500 feet this way, and then that's another border. And then the rest of the land belonged to the tribe, whoever it was. So the Levites got to raise their cattle and their sheep and their goats, whatever animals they wanted to keep, in this 1,500-foot strip of land around 48 cities. They didn't have their own territory. They aren't even considered a tribe to Israel. We think, well, that's the Levite tribe. But no, it's not. Now you're going to see in Revelation 7, 144,000 will be chosen from the tribe of the Levites. But that's because they have no temple to be in. Now, Simeon, on the other hand, was put in a tough spot in the Negev desert, completely surrounded by his brothers, who probably didn't want him to have anything. They probably fought all the time. And Simeon was thought bad about by his brothers, didn't think much about what they did. In fact, they thought they put him in danger because the Shechemites, or whoever felt like they wanted to get revenge on him, was going to kill him at some point. So they had the Negev desert to deal with. They fell in half. They did a census, and their numbers fell in half in a few years. I forget how many years exactly it was. They ended up just being absorbed in the scattered. If you were a Simeonite, you could, I'm going to Ephraim, or I'm going to Dan, or I'll stay here in Judah, but I'm not playing the Simeon game anymore. They weren't going to do that. In Numbers 1, this is where you see it. In Numbers 1 and Numbers 26, that's where the census was taken. God told Moses to do a census on the Israelites. This count would be for young males able to fight. Women, children, and the old would not be counted. Again, in Numbers 26, they were counted again. Simeon's population had fallen by half. Besides being completely surrounded by Judah's land, most of their land was in the Negev desert. Simeon was probably the first tribe to completely disappear and be absorbed by the other tribes. In 1 Chronicles 4:42, It is said that about 500 of them even moved to Edom and became Edomites. Edomites have been the enemies of Israel forever. So they got so few that 500 of them said, heck with it, I'm out of here. Let's go live with the Edomites. They didn't. And you got to remember too that Moses hadn't put the law down yet, but they will have to follow the law of Moses later. By the time they get to this and divide the land, they are following Mosaic law. So this is still in Egypt with Jacob dying, but this map is drawn. Moses drew this. Moses is the one that put them here. So they had to follow the feast days, all of the Mosaic law, the dietary, all of this kind of stuff. A lot of these people gave up and said, you know, I think I'll just go worship an idol. I've had enough of this. So that's what happened. Judah was the only one. Judah and Benjamin and Levites were the only ones that stayed worshiping Mosaic law. And that's the way it is today. What you see in Israel today is remnants of Judah. That's why they call them Udin, you know, and everything. Levi, on the other hand, was divided from the start. Their land was a small strip around 48 separate cities. Notice the accuracy of the prophecy in verse 7. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Levites were divided from the tribes of Jacob, and Simeon was scattered. When reading the Bible, we need to be very careful we read it exactly. This is what is called a doublet or a couplet to the Jews. And each prophecy was correct on its own, and not for both of them. The Levites weren't scattered, but were divided. Even the Jews do not regard Levites with the Jews. The rest of us probably don't make this distinction, but Israel does. Even today, they don't serve in the military. Being Levite is a special category divided from the house of Judah, and the end of days, as the end of days gets closer, the need for priests to the new temple will get more important. So when they start building the new temple, these Levites are going to have to come out of the woodwork wherever they're at and come serve in the temple. And of course we know that the Antichrist will come up there and say, I am God, and there will be. Okay? So, verse 8, Judah. Now we're going to talk about Judah, and this is the longest one of the bunch, I believe. Maybe Joseph might be, I don't know, but this is probably the longest one of the bunch. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. And if y'all remember, Judah's name means praise. So that's kind of a pun. But he is saying the leaders are going to come from you, so they're going to praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. And we heard that with Joseph, didn't we? So he is going to be a leader of the tribes. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you shall have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. I underlined all of that because it's a very important verse for the Jews. And we're going to find out why in just a minute. Yeah, verse 10. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Now we get to Judah. This will be the longest prophecy in the whole chapter. In verse 8, we see a pun on the word praise. Judah means praise. In a normal blessing of a family's children, the firstborn gets the most wealth. The oldest is the patriarch over the other children, along with being their religious leader. Joseph received the double portion, and Levi received the religious leadership. Judah would receive the leadership over the tribes. We will later call Jesus the Lion of Judah. His hand will be on the neck of the enemy, Satan. As we are in the church age right now, Jesus is the Lamb of God. But in the last days, which is what Jacob is speaking of right now, Jesus, who will come from the line of Judah and will fit this line of speaking, as a lion, who will rouse him, is it saying he will be over all things and have higher rank than anyone. If you saw the king laying there, you wouldn't want to rouse him. He is the king.
Right.
And so now a lion's whelp is talking about confidence, kind of strutting, in other words, I'm the big dog. Pay attention to me. And that's, Jesus is going to come back as the Lion of Judah and rule with an iron rod. The days of the Lamb of God is the church age. And we need to understand that. We will see a lamb. When you go to Revelation, and John is having his vision in heaven, he sees a lamb as he was slain, but then it talks about the Lion of Judah. The church will see the lamb. The rest of the world will see the lion. This confused the Jews because they thought, they knew about this, but they thought that their Messiah would be a king and would rule with an iron rod. They did not know that it would come as a lamb for the slaughter. Okay. Verse 10 is a big verse to Israel. A scepter represents the highest power in the land, and one of those powers was the power of life and death. King David will come from the line of Judah, and the scepter of power stayed with Israel until the Romans occupied Jerusalem. If you remember, the Pharisees were trying to kill Jesus, but they had to get the permission of Pilate. When Rome took away the right to execute prisoners, some rabbis went around in sackcloth and ashes, believing that this verse had come about. Shiloh was known to be a reference to whom obedience belongs, to the coming Messiah. They knew this was a messianic line. They knew that the person whom obedience belongs, that's what Shiloh means. So they felt like that we have lost the scepter. We can't even put people to death. We can't stone anybody. We can't carry out our Mosaic law, and Messiah hasn't come. They believed that they had lost the scepter to Rome and that Messiah hadn't come. The priests lost their faith in Scripture. In fact, this happened in about 6 to 7 AD. There was a child already in Israel that they didn't know about. This should teach us something about reading the Bible. The Word is absolutely, positively trustworthy. The story about the priest marching around the city was verified by Josephus in his history books. We should learn from this that the Bible is trustworthy, but we may not understand what we are reading. Or it means something we aren't familiar with. Misinterpretation of Scripture has been the main divider in denominations for millennia. These priests should have been seeking the Messiah instead of assuming he hadn't come. It was recognized by two prophets. Luke 2:29, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace, according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation. And that Simeon said that. When Jesus was coming on the 8th day to be circumcised, they had two people there. You know, you have to have a witness. There always has to be two or more. So Simeon was a prophet, and he said, he saw Jesus and he said, I can die in peace now because I've seen my salvation. Okay? Now another one was Anna, and she lost her husband at a very early age, and she stayed at the temple praying, fasting, all of her rest of her life. She stayed at the temple. Very dedicated woman. And coming in that instant, she gave thanks to the Lord and spoke to him to all these who looked for redemption in Jerusalem. And Anna said that. So she knew that he was Messiah. So we had two witnesses there that knew that he was Messiah, but all these rabbis were running around in sackcloth and ashes saying the Bible's not true because we've lost all our power to Rome, and where is Messiah? So, right in front of you. Yeah. And he even said he was a Messiah, and they still didn't believe him, and they spent a whole 3 years there trying to kill him.
Yeah.
Verses 11 and 12 sounds a little strange to us, but it is telling us in language of the time that depicted a time of wealth and good times. Binding a donkey to a vine would not happen because grapes were too valuable to have a donkey tearing down vines. A vine might be bigger than your thumb or so, and you wouldn't want to tie a donkey up to it because he would probably tear it all down and everything. Well, the vines are going to be so plentiful and everything is going to be so rich and everything is going to be so good that you can tie a donkey to a vine and not worry about it, because there's more vines where that came from. And then there'll be a choice vine, and a donkey's colt will be tied to that. Jesus had rode the colt. But when this prophecy comes, there will be strong, plentiful vines to use casually. Wine will be so plentiful that people will wash their clothes in the wine instead of the water. Now, they're not really going to wash their clothes in wine. But this is a figure of speech that the wine is going to flow so thickly that you can pour it out as water. It's, you know, if Jesus is the vine, have we not washed our garments in the blood of the vine? As a donkey is an unclean animal, have we not tied ourselves to the vine in God's vineyard? So we're tied to Him and nothing else. There's no substitute for Jesus. And I've been listening to a sermon on TV. It's talking about the cross and nothing else. When you start varying away from the cross, you're bewitched. It's witchcraft to even talk about anything but Jesus. And so many people think they're going to add something. Well, I'll just do a little better by doing some works, or I'll do this, that, and the other. Everything is Jesus. He did it all. He took care of everything. As a donkey is an unclean animal, we got to remember that they have clean animals and unclean animals. It doesn't make sense to us because we don't think of animals that way. But they had certain hooved animals, they had certain birds and certain things that were declared to be unclean for whatever reason. Okay? Now, an unclean animal is a donkey, and have we not tied ourselves to the vine in God's vineyard? We're the unclean animal, and we have tied ourselves to the clean vine, to the choice vine, okay? In God's vineyard. His eyes will be red with wine doesn't mean he'll be drunk all the time, but that he will have fury and wrath for some. Now, Proverbs 23:29. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? All these people are crying. These are people that have been hurt. These are people that Jesus came to heal. These are people that he came for. All of these people will have red eyes from crying, but Jesus will have red eyes to judge evil in the last days. Remember, Jacob's prophecy is for the last days. Revelation 1:14. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes like flame of fire. He is going to have red eyes, and he is coming as a judge. Remember, the lamb is left over. He's coming as a judge now. Also, I think it's in Isaiah. I hate to tell you wrong. I believe it's in Isaiah. It talks about him coming through this valley of Jezreel, and for 184 miles, he slew people, and the blood ran as high as a horse's eye, and his vestments were blood red. And when somebody sees him and says, "How did you get this wine on your vestments?" And he says, "I went through the wine press alone." So he is saying, I'm going to come back and give judgment alone. See, I used to worry about that. When it would say, he's coming on a white horse with all of us behind him. I said, I don't want to judge people. I didn't want to do this army thing and be killing people. He's going to do it by himself. He doesn't need us to do that. So he is the judge, and he's going to do it by himself. With the tongue of his mouth, double-edged sword, he's going to pronounce death, and they're all going to die. The reference to teeth and milk, again, has to do with the times of plenty. Remember, we are going to the land of milk and honey. What comes out of the mouth of this descendant of Judah will be clean and plentiful. The first three sons don't really get a good report from Jacob, but Judah gets some really interesting blessings that the brothers could in no way understand. Keep in mind that Judah had a child with Tamar out of wedlock, and this would be the descendant of David and eventually Jesus. Genesis 49:13. Zebulon shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his brother shall adjoin Sidon. So if you look up here, Zebulon is between Galilee and the Mediterranean. There's not 5 or 10 miles between either one of them. He's going to be big into ships. He's going to be big into fish, seafood, all this kind of stuff. He's going to have a good trade route. They're going to do quite well. Okay? Now, Asher is going to be, there's a city here called Sidon, Phoenicia. This is Sidon right there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? After these two split into two groups, then he's going to be right in here, and this is Phoenicia and there's Sidon. So these guys are big into shipping and fishing and everything nautical.
Right.
And he's going to be able to get money out of it right here. He's going to be over here, the Sea of Galilee and all this. 500 years before this, you know, at least. Zebulun ended up settling about 5 to 10 miles from the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean. When it was part of the house of Israel, Phoenicia was next to them, and Sidon was the chief city there. 49:14. Issachar is a strong donkey, laying down between two burdens. He saw that rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a band of slaves. So Issachar was a band of warriors. They were good warriors. See, they're on the Jordan River here, so whenever they came in to attack them, they'd come on over here. They fought and they fought and they fought, but they liked their rest. They got tired of fighting, so they just said, you know, let's just become Assyrian. They were strong. They could fight, but it was endless fighting. He saw that rest was good and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden and became a band of slaves. So they were basically double-minded. They were trying to follow the law of Moses, but finally they gave up and said, you know, let's just give up and join these guys. As we can see now, 1 verse, 2 verses is all the rest of these are going to get. And it basically says what they're going to do for the next 1,000 years at least. Issachar is a little more involved to understand. They were a strong tribe, but ended up serving two masters. They would rather be slaves to Assyria than follow God's covenant, so they just submitted to slavery. They saw rest was better than fighting all the time, so they submitted. Now, if they had known what they were going to do to them in Assyria, they might have changed their mind. Assyria was some of the first terrorism in the world. They skinned people alive and tacked their skins on the walls to let other people see. Now, the women were taken as slaves and concubines or whatever, but the men, anyone of fighting age was probably killed, and the rest, any of the others, were made slaves. So, it's kind of like, you can fight me now or fight me later, but I don't know how you could ever submit to being conquered. That's what gets me about people that talk about giving up to an enemy. I don't know how we could have let the Taliban win. I don't know how we could have let the Japanese win or the Germans win. I'd rather be dead than be a slave. I don't see it. Okay, verse 16. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. And if we remember, Dan means judge. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that the rider shall fall backward. I have waited for your salvation, O Lord. Now remember, this is a long time before Dan was an actual tribe. This is just a guy. First thing to be reminded of here is Dan was the first of the concubine children to have special notice. If you'll remember, Rachel was the loved one. She was favored. Then Leah was his other wife. And then we had the two concubines, Bilhah and another one, Zilpah. Okay? The children of the concubines have very little written about them. So we know that the children of Rachel were Benjamin and Joseph, and they were highly loved. And also we know that Leah had Judah. So these concubine children are kind of also ran. They're just part of the family, but kind of distant. And it even was that way between brothers, because a concubine child would not like Rachel's child or Joseph or something. There was always animosity And there's always a pecking order. And it had to get on their nerves all the time that these kids always won out. Because Jacob loved Rachel. And I think he cared for Leah, but he loved Rachel. The concubine children were usually farther down the pecking order and didn't amount to much, make much significance. We also need to remember that judges will come to pass way in the future. That's like 5 more books ahead of this Genesis. So why would he be a judge? They didn't know what a judge was, see? They had no leaders right now. Dan will be mentioned in the book of Judges because Samson was a judge and came from Dan. Next we see that he will be a serpent that bites the horse's heels to make the rider fall backwards. That's a backslider. Dan was the first tribe to fall to idol worship and caused others to fall. That's in Judges 18:30. And of Dan, he said, this is Deuteronomy 33:22. And of Dan, he said, Dan is a lion's whelp, and he shall leap from Bashan. And remember, I told you, anytime you see Bashan, a little bell ought to go off and say, this is demonic. Because Og was the king of the giants, and he lived in Bashan, and he grew cows. So anytime you see the bulls of Bashan, that's demons. Okay? You can read, I think it's in, it's either in Psalms or in Isaiah. And Jesus is on the cross, and he is saying, the bulls of Bashan have surrounded me, or encircling me.
Yeah.
And most people don't get what he's saying. But he is looking spiritually down from the cross, and all of these demons are surrounding him, circling him. And I think it's in Psalms, isn't it? When Jesus is on the cross, this is what he's thinking. He is seeing these bulls of Bashan. So when you see this, what is the first animal that they made out of gold was a bull. A calf. So when you start seeing things spiritually, you can start seeing demonic things in the Bible. Is trying to write between the lines to tell you a story that we can't see with our eyes. The scales have to come off of our eyes so that we can start seeing spiritually. Being a lion's whelp usually means you're bold and hard-headed and impulsive. Its sons' names are just described as Husham, and that means hasty. Another translation calls them pit diggers. Anytime you read Bashan, immediately think of demons and demonic activity. This is the area of Og, the king of the giants. It is not close to Dan's land. Today we would call it the Golan Heights. Dan is slighted in almost all genealogies. His name is blotted out in 1 Chronicles 1 through 10 and in Revelation 7. So Dan is not highly thought of by the Holy Spirit. He is the first to go to idol worship, and he took other people with him. Now if you'll notice, here's Dan over here. This area right here. The Golan Heights are way over here. See? So he is leaping from Bashan. He didn't have anything to do with this over here, but the demonic activity came from here to here. That's what he's trying to tell you there. Gad, a troop, shall troop upon him, but he shall troop upon their head. Heel, rather. Now if you remember, Gad means troop. When we were talking about his name. He was good warriors, and he was attacked quite a bit, but he fought back, and he ended up winning in some battles. Gad was one of the 3 tribes settled on the east of the Jordan. Therefore, they needed to be warriors. In 1 Chronicles 12, they are described as men of war that could handle the shield and buckler, with faces of lions as swift as deer. Elijah was from the tribe of Gad. So, as you can see, these traits are going to follow them all the way through the Bible. No matter, Gad, I'm sure, is dead at 100, 115 years old, 20, 50 years old, whatever. He'll be dead, but his descendants are going to be warlike and warriors and very capable warriors. Verse 20, as for Asher, his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Now, if you look up here at Asher, this is the best land almost there is in Israel. Good farmland. They got the sea here. Everything is going for them. And when we read about it, we're going to see that royal dainties means that they helped build the temple. Both temples, as a matter of fact. A lot of the stuff comes from here that was used to build the temple. Asher was settled in lush, fertile farmland, and they made foods that were used by royalty. Asher's people and materials were used by David in 2 Samuel 5:11 and Solomon in 1 Kings 5:1 through 10. They kept the Passover under Hezekiah as opposed to others. The prophetess Anna belongs to this tribe in Luke 2:36. So when things were getting tough and people were starting to follow idols and backing out, Hezekiah was a good king, and Asher's tribe kept the Passover. See, there's always a remnant left. There's whole tribes disappear and go somewhere, but there's always a remnant left to keep the law. Naphtali is a hind let loose. He giveth goodly words. Naphtali settled north and northwest of the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Chorazin were there. Inhabitants were quick to run after Jesus and testify of him. So a lot of the people that were conversions and quick, they didn't fight Jesus at all. They followed him and testified of him. Next week we'll try to finish Genesis 49 and go on to chapter 50. All we got left is Joseph and Benjamin. And then we'll have to let Jacob die, and then Joseph mourn his death, and then take him back to the promised land. But I'm going to try to get it all in one weekend.